criticality? We'll start at the top again. Definition.
Yeah. Can I say I've never seen a criticality framework? Actually, I challenge any of your readers or viewers. Is there ever been a criticality framework that everyone's agreed upon? Because I bet there hasn't. Right? I just don't think it's possible to get everyone on board with criticality. I think it at least comes back to the asset management objectives and how important an asset or a system is to achieving an objective.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a good starting point. I don't think necessarily it will correlate with risk consequence necessarily.
Okay.
For the most part, it may, but I'm sure there's edge cases where it doesn't because of the nature of risk and objectives and so on and so forth. But I think it's important to guide initial efforts in maintenance and reliability, probably maintenance engineering more so than reliability engineering. But I think we also need to be very aware that if we have some sort of Deming plan, do, check, act cycle, that probably on the second or third lap, it's become less important. But I think at the starting point, it is important to sort of, it's almost like the starter motor of your car to get that thing going. It's a very loose answer, Shane, but I think it's difficult, really difficult.
Yeah, I think you kind of, most companies start with some form of criticality, like in their journey, right? And I'm not dismissing the utility of it as a starting point. I think you got to build up and work with what you got. But I think companies pretty quickly move past, or should move past
it. Yes.
And that being said, like if you're a new asset manager today, or you're moving into a new business and you've got the chance to kind of put fresh systems in and fresh approaches in, it'd be something that I would put in the bin. And I think it's similar sort of issues, right, to the health score, in that one is the definition, like how are we defining it? It's the same thing. Some people talk about criticality being risk. Some people talk about it being consequence only. Some talk about it being like likelihood, RPN, consequence mesh. Like, but if you're talking about risk, call it risk. If you're talking about consequence, call it consequence. If you're talking about some other method, I mean,
risk priority number is always one I see come in from the FAMICA, right? That always, comes in as like that's the critical failure mode or whatever you do.
And the common justification I've heard for it, I guess, is like when we're starting out, we need to find where we should focus our efforts. Like what assets are the ones that we should focus on, and that makes sense from high level, but then you go into the detail and you go to what end, and how are you going to focus on them differently, and then you start talking about maintenance and capital intervention plans and so on, and it's like, well, you want to really target them to the modes and the likelihoods of the different things occurring and what the consequences of those specific modes are. And so it kind of quickly goes away, and you've got to do your due diligence and get into the detail anyway. And so, it's one of those.
It's a wicked problem. It's a wicked question, right? But I think, this is sort of sprung to mind, but I'll come off a long run up here. So like, we do reliability-centered maintenance to develop maintenance strategies at a system level, right? That's how it should be applied. You're going to spend an inordinate amount of time and probably not be very effective if you're doing it at an asset level. Really the standard talks about doing it at a system level. And if you start thinking of that sort of system approach, right, you probably start to lose criticality pretty quickly, because every system, like if you think it's just a simple reliability block diagram at that high level, you know, majority of them are in series, right? So they're like equally sort of critical to the outcome at a system sort of level. So I think once you sort of get into a maturity sort of level that you're not necessarily managing assets, you're managing systems of assets, that's when you probably start to lose the need for criticality, because then you're starting to look at the performance of the system. And I think that's probably like the maybe 1 or 2 cycles of the Deming cycle where you start to go, oh, okay, it's not very important. I just need to ensure that system A is, you know, got lower risk than what it has. However you do that, you do you, right? Because the configuration could be such that you have, you know, a lot of redundancy, or you might put in redundancy. Like how you manage, you know, that sort of system is ultimately up to the asset owner and should be driven by the context of their organisation. So I think once you get into, you know, properly reviewing maintenance, performance and asset management performance, that's when the sort of light bulb goes off. We go, oh, actually, an asset level criticality is less important because I'm now managing at a system level.
Yeah, and you've just reminded me that there's also this time element to it as well. Like you can put in a new asset with really high criticality in the definition of consequence.
Yep.
But it could have like a degradation that lasts for quite a long time with like pretty minimal risk, and then accelerates.
Yep.
And to be focusing your efforts on that asset at the beginning of its life is, you know, it's wasteful.
Yep.
So you do need to understand the whole, you know, time element of it and failure mode level detail. So
and it's supposed to be clear for your listeners and readers, we're talking about like asset criticality, not so much like maintenance, rectification, repair criticality, and so on and so forth. That's a whole different kettle of fish.
Or can of worms.
Well, yeah. Kettle of worms, almost. Like
a kettle of worms. I like it. Kettle of worms. I'm going to use that one.